Creativity flourishes under pressure. When looking back at old games, a big part of their charm was their commitment to get a point across while still dealing with the limitations of time and resources. Resident Evil 1 used fixed camera angles and pre-rendered environments to allow for realistic and scary-looking areas without having to worry about performance. Silent Hill had issues with terrible draw distance, so a fog was introduced that not only created a solution for the technical problems, but also made the game a whole lot scarier. Hell, if you play Mario 64 even on modern systems, he still turns into a Dorito at longer camera angles. In the case of Dishonored though, the pressure the development team faced came down to more than just hardware and technicalities. The success of their game would determine the entire future of the studio. And I think they did a damn good job with the hand they were dealt. The game was, and still is, massively successful and acclaimed, having sold over 400,000 copies in its first week on the market, and going on to sell upwards of 3 Dishonored on PC alone. The only question is, how? How did Arcane Studios come so close to failure, only to surpass their previous successes with this title? How did they create a game as unique as Dishonored under such pressure? And most of all, how and why does everyone remember the game? Arcane Studios' development history leading up to Dishonored is very confusing. Before making games like the Dishonored series, Deathloop, Prey, and Redfall, I guess, Arcane started off making some first-person RPG-style games, such as Arx Fatalis, which gave them some decent success. The critical acclaim of Arx Fatalis made Valve ask Arcane to make Arx Fatalis 2 on the Source engine, but the actual sales of the original were too poor for it to be viable. Ubisoft then asked if they wanted to apply some of the design from Arx on their IPs, and Dark Messiah of Might and Magic was created. This is where things get stranger. Valve approached Arcane again after the failed development of Arx Fatalis 2 to ask if they wanted to create a Half-Life spin-off, Ravenholm, and the two studios worked for years on the project only to scrap it. Then Arcane began working on The Crossing, an experimental shooter with both multiplayer and single-player elements, but scrapped that after EA wanted them to collaborate on a video game with Steven fucking Spielberg called LMNO, which ended up being scrapped as well. Out of options, Arcane took up roles in aiding studios with development, helping Activision with World at War's multiplayer and the art and design of BioShock 2, which actually is the best BioShock game. No hate. However, these roles in assisted development proved not to be fruitful enough for Arcane, and the studio was ready to let go of employees. Fortunately, they were approached by Bethesda to make an immersive stealth game set in Japan called Dishonored. With founder Rafael Colantonio and designer Harvey Smith having pitched a ninja game a few years before, it seemed the studio's best option was to take the deal with Bethesda and work on Dishonored. After a 3-year development time, give or take, Dishonored was released to massive acclaim. But enough blabber. What actually made it so special? Instantly, the art style and graphics of Dishonored caught my attention. Instead of going for the hyper-realistic look that usually ends up aging poorly, Dishonored went for a stylized, artistic look that almost reminds me of a Cézanne painting. In reality, the mood of the story was actually more inspired by the works of English painters like John Atkinson Grimshaw, but Dishonored succeeds in having its own unique feel. The beautiful daylit skies contrast with the murky dystopia of the industrial towns below, creating not only great eye candy for people playing the game, but also furthering the narrative. Every level has its own twist on the standard aesthetic the intro establishes, making the game full of variety while still being consistent.
This is unbelievable.
The visuals create a perfect backdrop for the narrative of the game, which might be one of the strongest aspects of Dishonored. The story is detailed, thoughtful, and most importantly, player-driven. Dishonored starts off having a smaller, condensed plot, and slowly builds to a bigger scale until its world is more fleshed out than that dude from Terraria. Never before have I seen a world so fully explored. No detail goes to waste, no plot point is unimportant, and it creates an incredibly interesting environment to set the gameplay in. You start off coming back to your homeland on a ship, and everything expands after that. After arriving and sniffing out the area, meeting some friendly and not so friendly people, the monarch gets assassinated, you get blamed for it, and then you become betrayed. You then escape out of prison and meet the scruffy boatman, who takes you to the Hound's Pit pub, where a bunch of rebels are hiding out, which will later become one of the best levels in the whole game when your friends actually dishonor you. It certainly sounds like a lot of work to understand, but when actually playing the game, the story's fed to you at a pace that never overwhelms you. Because the way you learn about the world is more about interacting with it than just watching shit happen. To understand Dishonored, one must not just play through the game, but actively engage with it. By exploring more, sneaking into more areas, and eavesdropping on more conversations, you'll have more fun with your playthrough.
Always working on something he keeps secret, and he has that brutal... Trust me. Gentle as a man. Now, taking this food.
It's not a completely brand new idea to receive exposition through gameplay, but considering the landscape of the industry at the time, this was a breath of fresh air. Dishonored came out in the era of the Xbox 360 and PS3, and most of the games on the consoles would rely on cutscenes to tell the story, and keep it completely separate from the time you would spend committing horrible acts of violence. When I played Dishonored for the first time, I was all too familiar with the generic formula that title after title would continue to follow, failing to take risks. So when it actually tried something new and exciting to hold my attention, I knew it was special. Let's talk about freedom for a second. So many titles nowadays are pushing for freedom. Whether you're watching an event like E3 or the Summer Games Fest, so many of the games generically pitch themselves as this world where there are just absolutely no limits at all, where you can seemingly do anything.
An enormous dynamic world where you can create any kind of character you want, go where you want, and do whatever you want. You can walk away whenever you want, you can shoot him in the face if you want. We made an app for it.
The thing is that games always have to have limits, regardless of whether they're open world or linear, RPG or shooter, and so it's actually those limits that make the games fun. Fallout, for example, is a massively open-ended game, but it limits you to be set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Without that limitation, however, the game wouldn't be nearly as fun. So the highest praise that I can give Dishonored is that despite the fact that it's a linear first-person action video game, it might give the player some of the most freedom I have ever seen in a game. One of the most important aspects of freedom in Dishonored comes through the chaos system. Dishonored at its core is a stealth game, but in reality, that's just a suggestion. You can absolutely kill everything in your path if you want to, and the game has no resistance to this. At first. If you kill more and more and achieve high chaos, things start to change in the world. More swarms of rats appear, killing both your enemy and innocent people. Security guarding your targets becomes more and more tight with more troops, which could just mean more and more people to annihilate because you are a killing machine after all. There are these bone charms that you can collect that allow you to kill with even more efficiency, and a wide selection of powers that make murder just so easy. The payoff, though, is that you become a piece of shit. The final level turns from bright blue skies to a thundering storm. As you ride in with Sam the Boatman, he insults you.
And you. I'm a little disappointed, Corvo. It's like you've gone out of your way to be brutal. It's been interesting traveling with you, but this is the last time you'll see me, sir. Goodbye. I'm warning you, Corvo. Out of the boat.
Your ending is not a good one. But it doesn't have to be this way. All of your abilities in Dishonored have a use for both being violent and peaceful. The blink can be used to quickly gain distance and secure a kill, but also to quickly flash away from enemies who might notice you. Instead of stabbing people, you can choke them out, or use tranquilizer darts instead of bullets and bolts. Taking control of rats and guards can give you quick kills, but can also help you sneak around without being noticed. While Dishonored is a linear experience, its open-ended nature becomes more apparent the more you experiment. The main objectives in levels can seem very one-sided at first, but these too can be tackled in many different ways. The fate of the targets can be as simple as just killing them, or you can get a little more creative. The High Overseer can be branded with the Heretics brand, marking him as an outcast and disgracing him to rot in a pit infected with the plague. A plague which the Royal Spy Master actually started as a way to eradicate the poor.
I'm real sick, John. Lumbago.
And you can reveal this by playing his audio diary over the propaganda intercom and get him arrested for treason instead of just killing him. On the House of Pleasure mission, you can shock this kinky guy a few too many times and reveal the code to his safe. I mean, it helps you take the pacifist path, but honestly I just do it because it's funny.
What the?
There's a pattern that happens about every other console generation, where people start to get a bit of a nostalgic itch. For me personally, I felt the urge to go back and play all my Wii games when the Switch was out for a while. When people couldn't play PS3 discs on their PS5s, then they started to appreciate the console's games more. With that in mind, now more than ever, people are fond of the Xbox 360 era. Despite their time being fairly recent, people are starting to particularly enjoy the systems again, and go back to play their favorite games on the 7th generation of consoles. A big part of why Dishonored is so well remembered is not only because it's just simply a fantastic game, but also because it came out at a fond time in gaming that is constantly being revisited. 2012 wasn't that long ago, but the gaming landscape has drastically changed since then, and it's nice to go back to such a seemingly uncomplicated time through your favorite pieces of media. The early 2010s had such a wide variety of incredible games, and for me, Dishonored tops the list. I've never experienced a first playthrough more amazing than Dishonored. It's the kind of game that truly values investing you in it, and once you're in its grasp, it's hard to be pulled out. Dishonored reminds me why I love video games. It's a landmark for progress and depth in gaming. Dishonored doesn't need a massive map or hundreds of hours of hollow gameplay to sell you on its freedom, because it is just simply better. It's on a whole other brainwave. Where other games would go forwards in a straight line, Dishonored blinks behind and surpasses them. Stealthily.